Okay, there we go. It's working now. I had to turn down. It's too bright in here. It's really rainy out too. All right, it's probably better. All right. So, for this week, there's some readings about Plato's cave. Take your time with it, enjoy it. It's an interesting story that really helps us to understand ignorance. And what we're going to do this week is actually apply the concept of ignorance into what happens in the workplace, either with employees or leaders. So I'm going to go ahead and poke over and review some of the article here with you. So basically, in this case, the idea is that people are stuck in this cave. They see a shadow, and that shadow is the only possibility that they see. So, in other words, they're in a situation where their minds can't expand much more than what's 3 feet in front of them. Okay, so the analogy there, I guess you could call it an analogy, is that we often do this to ourselves. Think about leaders out there who only can see 3 feet in front of them. They don't necessarily see the future. They're not looking towards different trends or different possibilities. They're just kind of focused on their ignorance, as it were. And again, ignorance is not necessarily a bad thing. I'm a big fan of selective ignorance. Some aren't a fan of that, I guess, but that's okay. Like I've always talked about my experiment where I got rid of the watching the news and social media, cut everything off during the pandemic, and it lasted for years before I even watched one news clip or even logged into social media. It was a few years actually. So anyway, the idea that's selective ignorance. That's a whole nother world. Ignorance is within itself in relation to the cave, as it's talked about, really just has to do with our minds and how we can be ignorant, not selectively so, but we really can't see what's more than a few feet in front of us. Parallel to the idea of being stuck in a cave and only seeing your shadow and what's in your area there, and not even asking what's outside of that cave. And that's what can happen. This is akin to prisoners in many respects. The article talks about that, on how we as humans doesn't take very long, by the way, to become what they call institutionalized. So, say the proverbial prisoner is set free, or in this case, I guess for leaders, the prison of our own mind is set free. We are going to have a hard time dealing with that because we're still stuck there. There's a lot of unknowns. So, as they say, we don't know what we don't know. And we don't even know that we don't know. Let me try that again. We do not know what we do not know. And we don't even know that we don't know. So, in other words, we have no clue what's beyond our immediate locus of control. So, let me give an example of an organization parallel to Plato's cave. Blockbuster. When I do presentations, when I've done presentations out in the public and all that, and training courses, staff development, and the like, I'd always bring up Blockbuster. I'd do it in a fun way and say, "How many of you are going to go rent something at Blockbuster this weekend?" And they'd look at you stupefied because, of course, there is no Blockbuster. Like, okay, well, tell me why. Why, what's going on? A very simple answer. We have Netflix. We have this. We have that. We have Hulu. We have all this stuff on demand. You don't need to go to the store. Fun fact is that when Netflix came about, Blockbuster had the opportunity to buy them. But they said, no one's going to want to go ahead and watch TV on their computer or movies on their computer. They didn't see the forthcoming technology where you can stream things on your television, on your phone, which is, amazing if you really think about it, right? They didn't see all that. So what happened was eventually they became bankrupt. They did have one last Blockbuster somewhere in Alaska. I believe it closed, but it was way out there. So anyway, the idea here is that that's a good example of how our ignorance can drive us to stay what I would call complacent. So you can see this in employees. Employees do this a lot, unfortunately, where they don't see 3 feet in front of them. They're very risk averse when it comes to change. That happens quite a bit. Update, on technology, something new. And even in the midst of chaos, you could be in the midst of organizational chaos. And some employees would rather accept that chaos rather than risk the idea of a future and unknown situation, which they deem to be potentially chaos, although it might be the most beneficial thing to do. So that's kind of the idea behind this story about Plato and the cave. So let me go through here a couple things. All right, um, one moment. So one of the quotes in this article here, the one from MIT, says human beings tend to prefer cognitive comfort, the reinforcement of the familiar, to an encounter with the unknown. So that kind of goes back to what I said about being risk averse. The idea is just easier to be comfortable, even if it's not good for you. And we as humans do that. We're human, it's just the way it goes. But as leaders, future leaders, and strong followers, we need to kind of abandon that cognitive comfort, as it were, and risk the unknown from time to time as it means to grow and develop, need it be ourselves or our organization. So that can be an issue. And if leadership prefers cognitive comfort, then what you're doing is you're creating complacency throughout your organization. Followers tend to follow leaders in that respect. So if there's this cognitive comfort in this security and not taking any risks, then what will happen is others will follow. So that's the leadership followership model, as it were. Okay. Let me look through here a little bit more. Beautiful quotes here. As Plato expects, we feel deep sadness at the absence of any chance to understand anything, to achieve anything of value, or to experience anything of beauty. So that's what they reference to as the horror of ignorance. The idea that we will find sadness because we're not literally looking to understand anything, to achieve anything of value, or to experience anything of beauty. I think in this case, translation to working in an organization, again, it goes back to being complacent. Same kind of thing. And it's sad. This is it. We are not making changes for ourselves or for others or for the better of the organization. And it's kind of what he calls the author calls a horror of ignorance. And it is horrible. So think about this with employees, they tend to get complacent. They might want to do something, but they'll find a way to talk themselves out of it. Favorite story in the world. My father, he retired from the publishing industry many years ago, and then he took a job with government, state of Delaware. And serious guy. A very nice guy, but he was very serious in other ways. So he took a class called How to Succeed in Government Employment. It's like, great, I'm learning how to succeed in government employment. Sat down, listen. And the instructor was recommending they look at getting education, certifications, etc. This training, that's training. And what he had told me is quite a few of the employees were actually coming up with all kinds of reasons. Yeah, but I don't know if I can afford to go to school. Or I don't know, they won't promote me. Even if I try, da 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 da. Just kept going. My father, coming from the corporate world, was not used to this new world, and he just raised his hand towards the end and said, all of you who said those things just summed up your career. Said the way you're explaining and justifying not doing something, you just summarized your career. You gave up. I said, you need to get out there, find out what the possibilities are. You need to go ahead and achieve your goals. You need to look at what your goals are instead of coming, up for excuses for not achieving them. And I'm like, well, Father, welcome to government. At least in that time, in that era. I don't know if it's like that now, but again, the idea was they're complacent. Or another example would be when we upgrade on technology. When I worked for the government, and one employee say, "Well, I'm not doing it. I'm retiring soon anyway." I said, "Well, you're young enough where you still have to work, right?" "Yes." "So you look forward to the private sector?" "Yes." "Okay. Well, they're not going to be asking you. They're going to be telling you. And if you don't adapt to what they need, you won't have a job." And for quite a few, they had a tough experience adjusting from one sector to another. But sometimes the limitation of our own mind, it's not about that we can't achieve something, it's that we feel that we cannot or we do not want to, or that fear of comfortability being revoked from our lives will somehow make our lives worse. When in reality, when it comes to being a transformational leader, situational leader, servant leader, the idea would be that we have to be mindful about our own ignorance. We have to be mindful that sometimes we get complacent. We have to break out of that. We have to break out and branch out for ourselves, for our organizations as leaders, and for the viability of an organization. And as we are all learning, the world is changing so rapidly. So we have to be agile and change with the industry that we're in. So I want you to enjoy these articles here and just really think about it. Where is it in your life where you're the prisoner of your own mind? We all do it. We're all human. Uh, None of us are omniscient or omnipotent. So there's times where we're just complacent. Sometimes we are in the midst of the horror of ignorance. So I guess what our goal here, based on Plato, is to prevent deep sadness, start to seek knowledge, to understand, embrace change, look at future possibilities, um, achieve what we would call or we define value, and experience beauty, however you define that. So the idea here is that we are now charged with looking at ourselves to see where we are ignorant and what we can do to help others embrace, for instance, change, to be creative, to break out of that complacency or that proverbial cave where all we see is what's in 3 feet in front of us and perhaps a shadow. Okay, with that said, we'll talk more about this on the boards. Talk to you soon.